This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me. As I'm recording this, the United States military is conducting bombing operations against Iran without a Congressional Declaration of War, consistently stated objectives, or even terms on whether this is a war or not. Everything is in chaos. Some of the chaos is due to pure incompetence. According to several media outlets, just days before President Donald Trump decided to follow Israel's lead and bomb Iran, his FBI laid off an entire team of analysts who were experts at tracking Iranians online. All because the people who were fired had been investigating in the previous administration Donald Trump's retention of classified documents after he was forced out of office after his first term. People often say that for Trump and other reactionaries, the cruelty is the point. But I don't think that's quite correct. And that is because oftentimes there is no larger agenda across the completely divergent beliefs of people who vote for the far right Republican Party. Some of them are techno-fascists who want to have a complete elimination of the human species. Then there are others who want to have a Christian theocracy of various points. And then still there are others who think that they just want to have their country club and have low taxes. So basically, there isn't a coherent agenda across all of these groups, and this is just only three of them, the biggest ones. But nonetheless, what they have been able to do is to weaponize discontent against modernity and to fearmonger against minority groups, particularly people who are transgender or religious minorities such as Muslims and atheists. And of course, they have been, in the Trump years, doubling down on racism and also fear of immigrants. So what can people who support democracy do in this situation? Joining me for a free-flowing discussion about all of this is a longtime friend of the show, Parker Molloy. She is a media analyst and critic who writes the Present Age newsletter, and she also formerly worked as a senior staffer at Media Matters. Theory of Change is part of the Flex Media Network, so go to flex.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, religion, media, and technology, and how they all intersect to create our culture. And if you like what we're doing, we have free and paid subscription options on Patreon and also on Substack. Just go to patreon.com/discoverflux, or you can go to flex.community. Thanks a lot for your support. It is much appreciated. All right, let's get into the program. And joining me now is Parker Molloy. Hey, Parker, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I feel like we keep having a continued conversation because nothing that we talk about ever changes for the better, it seems.
No, everything keeps getting slightly worse. Just keeps edging towards the horrible.
Yeah. Although I will say, at least at the grassroots level, I do feel like a lot of people have been learning a lot more. So like with Donald Trump announcing his bombing campaign against Iran, people automatically are against it. And that's, a majority. I think the most recent poll I saw had it was like 25% support it. So this is, there's some good progress on the citizen side of things.
Yes. Now the question though is, it's just like, how does that? I'm just very interested, like when it comes to the support for Trump, Trump's bombing and stuff like that. It's one of those times where Democrats, I feel like they have a real opportunity to stake out the anti-war lane. And I kind of worry, like there are clearly some Democrats who are very much pro-war with Iran. Like John Fetterman clearly wants to keep bombing, Moskowitz, he's the one who he opposes the War Powers Resolution because he called it the Ayatollah Protection Act. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, there are some pro-war Democrats here who maybe don't want to sound pro-war, which is why they're kind of like dancing around a little bit. But overall, I think that now is a good time to, stake out the anti-war lane if, if there is ever an opportunity to do so. It's right now. It's before the public gets on board with, this, if they do, instead of ceding the conversation to, to Republicans to be like, well, clearly Iran, the regime is evil and we had to do something,
Yeah. Well, and it is. I mean, it is a welcome contrast in many ways to the Iraq War, because at least with the second Iraq War, the Bush administration they cared enough to lie about it.
Yeah, I feel like we're not even getting lied to anymore. They're
Yeah.
they're not bothering to lie in a convincing way anymore. They're not making a case. I did see some. I can't remember where I saw it, but someone called the administration's response to all of this war slop, which is basically because Trump's been like calling up reporters at every major outlet and weirdly giving them all different stories about like how long he plans to be there, whether he's planning, boots on the ground,
And what the objective is.
yeah, why he did it. You have Marco Rubio saying like, yeah, we had to do this because Israel was going to attack Iran anyway, and so yeah, we kind of had it made sense for us to go in at that moment. And it's like, and then today Trump's like, absolutely not. They didn't get me to go and do anything I didn't want to. I feel like the whole point is just to throw everything out there and to see what sticks. Like,
Yeah.
One of my favorite things with the war right now is, on one hand, you have some Republicans saying we're not at war. What? Congress hasn't voted for war. This is not a war. This is a military action. Like whatever euphemism they want to use. And then you have other Republican members of Congress who are like, this war has been going on for 47 years and we are ending it. It's like,
Yeah.
so
Well,
it's a war that's been going on forever, but it's also not a war. And if you think about it, it's like, the last time that the United States formally declared war on a country was World War II. So it like, does Markwayne Mullin actually believe that we haven't been in a war since World War II? I don't think so. But I think he thinks that it's a winning message.
Yeah. Well, and doesn't seem to be that way so far. So that's good. But, it goes back to, though, the idea of shaping opinion. And that is why I think we've seen so much recent consolidation of media by right-wing oligarchs, and in particular, most recently, the acquisition of Paramount by David Ellison and Larry Ellison, his dad, and who are strong Israel supporters and Netanyahu supporters. We have to point that out. Now it looks like they have the prevailing bid, which they got through working with Trump in the most corrupt and blatant fashion I've ever seen for any sort of corporate acquisition. And to buy the company Warner Brothers, and so now they want to get. So they got CBS News, now they want CNN, but the ratings are just going down the toilet every time they do it. So that's at least a good thing.
Yeah, I do think that they're trying. A big part of this is to just, even if the ratings tank, and even if, like, I feel like cable news and like legacy media as a whole is kind of a struggling field right now, and is probably only going to get more difficult as time goes on. Which, when it comes to like Paramount's attempt to buy Warner Brothers, I thought it was interesting that they wanted to bid for all of Warner Brothers instead of or all of Warner Brothers Discovery, instead of just waiting for CNN to split off and buy it separately. Like, I think they realized that the movie studios, where the money is at, and owning all that IP is where the money's at. Like using CNN as a propaganda arm is kind of just like, that's not going to make money for them in the long run, but it will accomplish a different goal. Which is also, you also have Larry Ellison involved in the purchase of TikTok. So
yeah, that's fair too. Yeah,
you've got that, and obviously you have Elon Musk with Twitter, and Mark Zuckerberg has been getting cozy with Trump over the past few years, and it's there's a real like big right-wing takeover of media and communications services, and I feel like that's going to be a big story in the coming years, like how people who aren't part of that bubble, who aren't who aren't Barry Weiss, who aren't conservative podcasters and stuff, like how the rest of us kind of get our news and get our information, and what that means in the years to come. Because there was like that recent there was a recent study about how being on Twitter basically pushes you to the right. It's like and it'll have like, I'll open Twitter because I look at it to keep track of what's going on in the world, or what like powerful people are saying. And yeah, it's a cesspool. You get bombarded with a lot of really extreme content that's supposed to make you feel a very certain way. And I think that that's what TikTok's going to totally turn into. Maybe not as sloppy as Twitter, because Elon Musk is sloppy. Like maybe it won't be as obvious, but even the more gentle propagandists, at Paramount are showing their hand a little bit. You had Barry Weiss the other day retweeting a video of someone like getting in like a weird insult at Zoran Mamdani. She like retweeted that with like a fire emoji, and the Twitter account for 60 Minutes straight up said that Iran has nuclear weapons, which is literally no one is saying that. Like the Trump administration is not even making that claim, but they put that out there. And you have journalists jumping ship and saying like, I feel like I don't have editorial independence anymore. It's grim.
Well, it is, and it's like it is in some ways, like the old order had to die in some way or another, and I wish it was not this way. But maybe it is that way. And the weird thing though is that with this whole consolidation and trying to manipulate opinion and manufacture consent for war, which is, this is like a cliche of Noam Chomsky, which
he's someone who my opinion of has shifted a bit in recent months, especially.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. He had a couple of good ideas, but a lot of really bad and dumb ones. But my point being though, like the other weird thing about the way that these conservatives are taking over media is they don't seem to understand that they're on the right. Like people like Barry Weiss or David Ellison, like a lot of these people, they actually call themselves liberals. And people who are progressive, I think, contribute to that problem by using the word reactionary centrist. No, these people are just conservatives, okay? Yeah. Sam Harris, conservative. Barry Weiss, conservative. These are not centrists. There's no such thing as an informed centrist. They don't exist. So please stop saying that they do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I have noticed that. It was interesting because, like, I don't know, it was like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, somewhere around there, like it was a big time for like a lot of the conservative, like the intellectual dark web types, Oh, they're not conservative. They're classical liberals, like
Heterodox.
they're heterodox. Like that was the whole thing. It was this pretty deliberate attempt to frame themselves not on the right, but as the true middle. Elon Musk will come around and be like, he'll promote something that was, like the Reform Party in the UK, which they're to the right of the Tories. He'll be like, I don't see what's far right about this party. All their views seem very very, very sensible. I consider myself, he loves to say he considers himself a moderate, which is just flat out not true. He's not moderate on anything. He'll show up in like doing, video, he'll video in what's the German far right party, AfD, like, and he'll be like, their views seem perfectly normal and fine, and I don't understand why people call them far right. Why don't they call and then he'll argue that someone like Chuck Schumer is far left. It's like, I don't know, man. I feel like you're kind of you're kind of trying to shift the Overton window, and I know that like that gets talked about a lot, but just trying to shift what people consider to be a moderate opinion is. And I remember years and years ago when there was a whole thing with when Candace Owens started hanging out with Kanye West. Mm-hmm. There was a Twitter trending topic that said far right influencer Candace Owens, and she got so mad about that. She was like, I'm not far right. I'm in the middle. I'm a little right of center or whatever. Like, however it was that she was trying to like frame her views. And Jack Dorsey, who was still the CEO at the time, he reached out to her and he followed her on Twitter, and he fixed it. And he said, this will never happen again. And you had conservatives pointing to that as evidence that Twitter was biased against conservatives. It's all to project a certain narrative to try to shift the public's understanding of where various people on, the political spectrum are.
And it's like, when you look at the Trump administration or reform in the UK or any of these other far right parties, they don't really have coherent policy arguments. It's all about, well, my views are common sense. Like, this just makes sense. And so therefore policing what the possibility corridor is, or the Overton window, that is their number one argument, that, well, these ideas are just right, and your ideas are communist. Like, Trump has now started using the word communist all the time, like referring to Democrats who have literally expressed opposition to, not even single payer healthcare, but like national health insurance of some kind. Yeah. He calls them a communist, which is ludicrous. But if you don't know very much about political ideology or whatever, mm-hmm. It's, it apparently at least has some effectiveness. And if you can control the platforms, then I think, that is why they've realized that, we're going to do this. But it just isn't working because, these arguments, like, this was one of the problems that I had when I was conservative, that, I would say to my colleagues, I'd be like, okay, can we please have some arguments for mm-hmm. our ideas here? Like, I want to see an argument for why, because you always say tax cuts always increase revenue. Mm-hmm. Well, show me math that says that, so I can put it into a column. Or if you don't have math that says that, then you can't say that. Like, I would say that to mm-hmm. writers who I was editing, and and they just would say, "Oh, you're being negative, Matt. You're being negative." And I was like, "Well, no, I'm actually trying to be factual."
Yeah.
But that's not what they want, and you just see that over and over, like with this Iran stuff. Everything is that there's no stated reason, there's no real goal. Like, so now they're not even saying that they want regime change, whatever that means.
Yeah.
They don't even talk about that anymore. So,
Yeah.
so we're literally just bombing them
Just bombing for fun.
to bomb.
Gotta. What's that old Simpsons quote? Gotta nuke someone. But like, yeah, with that, there was something in the 2020 Democratic primary that I think a lot about, which is it was during one of the debates. It was Pete Buttigieg. It was early in the primary, and he said something to the effect of, look, if we run on a bunch of far left policies, Republicans are going to call us a bunch of crazy socialists. And if we run on a bunch of moderate policies, Republicans are going to call us a bunch of crazy socialists. So why don't we just run on whatever we actually believe and let that fall where it may, because they're gonna attack us for the exact same reason every time, which I think is why the argument that, oh, Kamala Harris was too far to the left, like I've seen some of the like the third way type think tanks be like, well, you'll notice that Trump didn't attack her for being too moderate. It's like, in what world would he? If he was running against Ted Cruz, he would say Ted Cruz is far left. Like he would make some sort of argument to that effect. It doesn't matter. You could take anyone, and the playbook is going to still be the same, because attack. Oh, the Dems are socialists. Okay, I mean, it's a label you can apply to anyone, but I don't think that it's accurate in any real way. And there's no policy. Same thing happened with the border in 2024. You had Kamala Harris running ads being like, we're going to be so tough on the border. Like Trump is actually the weak one on the border. We're going to be tough. We're pushing to his right. He blocked a bill that we all support, which was basically like the Trump 2016 immigration policies, like we're doing that. Like Democrats were still attacked as being open borders, which there's not been a single open borders Democrat in power. I mean, when Obama was in office, I remember he did a press conference at the border where he was saying like, look, I've agreed to all these Republican policy proposals. I've giving funding to Border Patrol and all of this. And he joked, he's like, what will they want next? A moat? And it was like the next week in Congress, Joe Walsh, during his term in office, when he was still a Tea Party guy, he jokingly went up there with like a stuffed alligator, and he was like, yes, we would like a moat.
Yep.
It's like,
well, and Obama actually deported more people than Trump did.
Yeah, he got a lot.
Even now, like his rate is going to be less than Obama.
Yeah.
So
I still, and you'll still see some Democrats be like, we were actually more efficient when it came to deporting people, which is not what I think a lot. Like my personal like policy views on immigration are not like, I don't see that and go, oh yay. Like that doesn't make me happy. Like I think it's expected and it's accurate, but at the same time, it's like, man, who is this message for? Because Republican voters are still gonna think that Republicans are
tougher
to the right of Democrats on immigration or any other policy. And one of the things that I've been thinking about as it concerns the current bombing campaign that Trump has going on is that in 2004, you had the way that John Kerry ran for president in 2004, I thought was really interesting, because his big argument wasn't that the war in Iraq was wrong and that it needed to end. It was that it was being mismanaged. Like he was still trying to do the thing where he's like, okay, I'll agree that, we should be there and we should be doing something, but I would do it better. I would do it more efficient. And, in doing that, you had Republican voters just being like, no, he won't, not believing him. And you had like anti-war voters who would vote Democrat, who are just turned off by all this, who were just like, no, I want you to be anti-war. I want you to oppose the war in there, not try to triangulate some middle ground that probably doesn't exist. And the tricky thing about this is that the longer you're in a war, the harder it is to just be like, yeah, no, we need to get out. We need to end it. Because then you have what happened with Afghanistan during the Biden administration, where it was like chaotic withdrawal and things immediately got worse in Afghanistan, and he got piled on for that. And that's why when it comes to what's happening in Iran right now, it's like they got to find an off-ramp immediately. Otherwise, this is just going to be something where we're going to get stuck there, and there's going to be backlash, and there's going to be blowback, and who knows who we're going to radicalize, in doing that. I mean, there was a tweet from, I can't remember who it was. It was someone on Twitter. It was at the start of after October 7th, 2023. It was as Israel was like bombing Gaza, like when that started. Someone said on Twitter, was like, hey, if I was, a Palestinian living in Gaza, and Israel just bombed and killed my whole family and destroyed the entire, area, and in effort to wipe out Hamas, like I would grow up and the first thing I'd want to do is start Hamas too, like you're basically, yeah, you're radicalizing people and maybe entire generations of people, and you're making the US an unreliable partner. The fact that Trump ripped up the nuclear agreement with Iran, like why would they ever trust us? There were negotiations that were happening very recently, and Iran seemed to be participating in them. But then we just go in and take out like their entire leadership. And
I don't think that's going to make them more moderate.
Yeah. Well, and then, I saw a story yesterday. It was just like Iran not interested in negotiating. It's like, yeah, no crap. Like, yeah. I wouldn't be either.
Or even if they were, like, why would, like, how could you trust that they would be, like they were betrayed by the United States in terms of negotiations. So why wouldn't you pretend to have some sort of treaty and then just violate it as much as you could if you would? Like it makes sense for them.
Like that's the thing. It's all of this stuff is going to do so much damage to the reputation of the United States for decades to come. I mean, the fact that Trump wasn't kept out of office after his first term, like the fact that he came back into power, I think it sent a really strong message to the world that it's just like, no, that wasn't some weird aberration. This is just like who the United States might be every 4 to 8 years now, like,
yeah,
because
if the economy gets a little bit,
yeah, because I think it's interesting that a lot of the people who were on the on the far right during Trump's like first term are now, like the influencers, like you had like Ben Shapiro, like he got really big during Trump's first term. And then, like if you fast forward to today, his videos aren't doing so well anymore. He's losing audiences, and the viewers are going to more extreme people than him. And he was the guy who he said there's no such thing as, he said there is no such thing as like a reasonable Muslim. He was saying that more than half of the Muslims on the planet were radicalized, and that we should fear them. Like, people now look at him and they're like, oh, he's some squishy centrist type, and the people on the right who've migrated to Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens and
Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson, who, like, it's, I don't think that, unless things really blow up in Trump's face, between now and 2028 especially, it's like, I feel like the Republican Party may continue to just veer off in that direction and won't moderate back to something more like Jeb Bush. Like, imagine the Republicans like even considering a Jeb Bush candidacy in like now, or someone who had the identical policies of Jeb Bush. Like, it's laughable. And I think it really just kind of speaks to how they have successfully gotten their own base, at least, to shift further to the extremes.
Yeah. Well, and it does go back to the Overton window issue, and that's why the conservatives like Barry Weiss, they should be focusing their efforts on attacking the far right. But they really don't. They spend most of their time attacking the left, which, of course, is because they're on the right. But nonetheless, it isn't going to help them in the long run because, the Republican Party, the only way out of this is if they get electorally, defeated in such a horrible way for them, like Barry Goldwater.
Mm-hmm.
Barry Goldwater was the last honest Republican to actually run on what they wanted to do. And magically, Americans did not like it. They were horrified by it. And you're seeing that with the Trump second administration, that he's doing all the things that Barry Goldwater wanted. And of course, people hate them. But when he was running, he was not telling the people who, probably about half the Trump voters had no idea what his positions were. Like, they literally had no idea what his views were.
That was the thing in 2020. His campaign website just straight up didn't have an issues page. It was like,
and they had no platform at all.
There was no plan. Yeah, there was no plan for a second term. It was just like, I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing and vote for me, and you'll see what happens. And and then in the 2024, you had him. You had the Heritage Foundation come out there and they're like, we got Project 2025 for you right here. And immediately people were horrified by, seeing these policies laid out, which they've done that before. They've had those reports for years. Oh, yeah. And Trump in his first term enacted a lot of the recommendations, when he could.
Then Trump lied and said, I'm not affiliated with that.
Yeah.
Even though it was co-written by the guy who was my budget director before.
Yeah. He's
and
like,
is my current director now.
That's, I think he said, that was written by like some people on the severe right. And I remember one of the things was like, Republicans, Trump's, if Trump gets back into power, he's gonna ban all the people associated with Project 2025 from being in his administration. It's just like, immediately after getting elected, he starts working directly with these people and incorporating them into his administration. And, it really kind of speaks to the fact that candidates, especially I think Republican candidates, can't really run on what they want to do. Because the individual policies tend to be pretty unpopular unless you're, picking at like attacking trans rights. Like, they've successfully shifted public opinion on trans rights to where maybe that works to their advantage. And so they can talk about like what they'll want to do to trans people. But like a lot of things, like Trump. Trump never once mentioned I want to annex Greenland, like during the campaign.
I want to bomb it. In fact, he said Kamala Harris will go to
Yeah,
war with Iran if you
exactly.
elect her.
Exactly. He was just, there his big policy positions, it was always funny. He would be like, no tax on tips. It's like, okay, that's one of your big policies. Okay. Even though it's like, all right, fine, like,
Well, and even attacking trans people, like
yeah,
there are basically no trans people in America. So whatever policy, no matter how terrible or how great it would be toward trans people, not really going to affect anyone who is cisgender. Like
yeah,
that's the reality.
yeah.
So it's not going to put money in your pocket. It's
No.
not going to help you afford a home. It's not going to give you a better education. It's not going to do any of those
Yeah.
things for you.
I
And you know,
I do think that the one policy that he kind of, there are two things he said he was going to do during his campaign that I think that he's pretty much followed through on. One was be really obsessed with tariffs. like he really got into that. And two was mass deportations. But as we've mentioned, it's just like Democrats were just as effective. They were just quieter about it. You didn't have, you know, as many instances of things like ICE gunning down people in the streets. But other than that, he kind of hit it. And I think one thing that's interesting in watching kind of the consultant class of the Democratic Party, how they're operating is one of their takeaways from 2024 was, oh, we shouldn't say what we believe. We should, like Kamala Harris filled out an ACLU questionnaire that asked her about her beliefs on civil liberties issues. She shouldn't have done that, which is so, like, I understand that from a strategy point of view, but I think it's bad that the conventional wisdom now seems to be like candidates should not tell you what they will do if given power. Candidates should just say, trust me, trust me, it'll be fine. I'll project your own views onto me, and that'll be great. Because it's easy when you don't say what you believe in, and people can just go, yeah, Trump's only going to round up the criminals, and he's only going to do this or that. And a lot of times it's not things that Trump actually said or anything like that. It was just like that was what people believed, and they projected their own beliefs onto Donald Trump, as people project their beliefs onto others all the time. So it might make sense for Democratic candidates to not respond to 20-page questionnaires that ask about whether trans people in prison should have access to healthcare or not. Maybe, but I think it's a bad thing for democracy as a whole when there seems to be this shift away from like actually saying what you believe, because it's more advantageous to just lie.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, though, that viewpoint, that campaign strategy, it isn't actually going to work for people on the center to left, and it's something that is inherent to reactionism, which is, of course, the more extreme form of conservatism. And there's a famous quote from Jean-Paul Sartre, which he was talking about anti-Semitism and why it doesn't make sense. And so I'm going to just read it here for those who haven't seen it. So he says, never believe that anti-Semites are completely unaware of the absurdity of their replies. They know that their remarks are frivolous and open to challenge, but they are amusing themselves, for it is their adversary who is obliged to use words responsibly, since he believes in words. The anti-Semites have a right to play. They even like to play with discourse, for by giving ridiculous reasons, they discredit the seriousness of their interlocutors. And that's Donald Trump right there. That's Donald Trump described right around World War II.
Yeah.
And so this is a inherent anti-rational, anti-institutional, anti-reason, anti-society. It is a sociopathic, revolt, personal revolt against reality. And that is why they can get away with these things. If you believe in something, you can't do that. And this is what the broader consultant class in the Democratic Party doesn't get. They don't understand that the right will always. The reason why they keep talking about culture war issues is that they don't have policies or they don't have policies that they want you to hear about. And so your goal, if you're going to oppose them, is tell people about their actual policies, have enough platforms in which your factual statements can be seen, and then propose good policies.
Yeah.
So you have to do all of those three things. If you don't do all of those three things, then it's not going to work. You can't say, well, I'm just going to do two or one, because like the UK Labour Party right now, like we're seeing what happens if you just try to say, well, let's concede this one issue of trans rights or immigration, because the reality is the issue is never the issue. No. So whatever your position is, it's a communist position. Yeah. Like as you were saying, Pete Buttigieg, picked it up. That so whatever you say, it doesn't matter to the people who have a psychological need to oppose modernity.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I think the one of the big warnings about like in 2024, you had in the UK the Labour Party won, and it was a landslide victory, and I think people attributed it to them. Like there were a lot. This happens a lot where you have people who write about politics for a living, who have more moderate views, who kind of say, well, clearly they won because they adopted the views that I believe, the views that I personally agree with. And so there was a lot of stuff where it was, I remember the Labour Party had people come and meet with the Democrats to talk to them about strategy after their big win. But the real reason they won was that they weren't the Conservative Party, that they weren't the party that was in power, and people were just mad about the current leadership in the country. They could have run the most extreme, like as far left as they could have brought back Jeremy Corbyn to to be the leader and to adopt his his policy. He would have won probably, like I think. And Labor got when he ran and lost in the general election before that, he ended up like more people turned out to vote for Labor than they did in 2024. But because they had this giant sweeping victory, people assumed that, well, it must be because they pick popular policies. But then they get into office and they start actually implementing these policies. And people hate it. And the response has been mostly to move more further to the right. And this is the nominally liberal party over there. They're supposed to be center left. That's supposed to be their lane, but they keep moving to the right, and they're trying to out reform basically. And it's just not, I don't think that can work, because people are always going to go for the real thing. They're always, if you try to appeal to fascists, the voters who like fascist policies are just going to vote for the real fascists,
because they want fascism. Like,
yeah,
they don't want your policy.
exactly. Like they don't necessarily care about, you know, whatever little policies here or there. They want to, you know, they want to cut down on immigration, and they want to impose their will on society and to take control of all this stuff. And it's just sad to see some bigger name Democrats kind of float, like, see that and still think that that's the way to go, because the lesson from the UK in electing a more moderate Labour Party ended up being, you know, or rather, the lesson in the UK of the Labour Party moving to the right and then winning was that an even more extreme right-wing party was going to swoop in and win the next election. Like, Labour's absolutely going to lose. And it's almost certainly going to be not the Conservatives, but Reform that takes power after that. And
Yeah.
I think one of my fears is that if Democrats as a whole, you know, move to the center, try to moderate their policies and triangulate their way to victory, you might just have, you know, a situation where they're in power for 4 years and then something even more extreme comes along. And I think that's what we got by, in 2000, you know, going with Joe Biden, who was seen as the moderate, you know, one of the most moderate options that was available during the 2020 election. And Biden gets into office and he's still pretty moderate. You know, he had some progressive economic policies that people seem to generally like. But in the end, he didn't keep Trump out. And in the end, we got something. Trump 2 is far more extreme than Trump 1. And I think that we risk, you know, that maybe Democrats win in 2028 if they moderate on a bunch of issues. But all that does is that shifts the Overton window. Because people are going to keep saying Democrats are socialists and they're far left and all of this, but it just might not be true. And in response, you're going to get some more extreme right-wing governance, which is going to be, you know, if you asked me back in 2016 when Trump first got elected, you know, one of my fears was, like, as a trans person, I was very afraid of what the administration would do. And, you know, it was like my worst case scenario that I could picture was like, okay, what if the federal government doesn't enforce Title IX to protect trans people anymore in schools, or doesn't enforce federal protections for trans people using Title VII. Like, those were kind of like the things that the big worries I had. You know, fast forward to today, and it's like, it's the federal government's official policy that trans people just don't exist. You know, that was Trump's big day one, you know, executive order. And then you have states trying to one up each other to see how extreme they can push this, because they know the federal government's going to just kind of let them do what they want to do, and the courts aren't going to stop them. So, you know, you've got right now, you know, last week or the week before, I can't remember. Time flies. You know, you've got in Kansas, like, they passed a law that invalidated trans people's driver's licenses, and
Basically,
immediately gave them no
like,
notice.
you couldn't move or, you know, do something.
Yeah, and because the licenses were invalidated and not like, there was something about the process involved, because they were invalidated, there was it flags something in a federal system, to where if you go to another state and, like, let's say someone moved the very next day and was like, you know, I'm getting out of Kansas, I'm going to move to Illinois. where I can get a driver's license that has my correct gender on it and my name and everything like that. Like, because their license has been like invalidated, it flags it in the system and it becomes almost impossible to just update it. Like, you had to go through the process of getting a new license in Kansas that had the wrong gender on it. And in all, it turned out that there were something like 300 people who this affected. Um, and it was a law that was passed as an emergency. And I think that that's like, stuff like that's really scary because it happens. It doesn't get a ton of news because there's so much other chaos going on. Like CNN is not covering the story about Kansas. Like the New York Times, like they I think they maybe do like a single write-up of it, but that's just kind of it. It's not like being treated like a crisis, because it affects very few people, and because there are bigger things going on. And in 2020, at the beginning of COVID, I remember one of the things that started to happen as you had Republican state legislatures that were like, I think they all, like, everyone kind of knew you had to do something about COVID. You had to pass some policies, and you had to, you couldn't just not take any action on anything. So instead of doing that, instead of actually addressing the problems of COVID and trying to manage them in the best way they could, because a lot of states were basically like, yeah, we're not going to have any rules, and it's just going to be free for all, and good luck. You had states where schools were not in session because COVID. School sports were definitely not happening, and yet that was when the big push to start banning trans kids from playing high school sports and grade school sports started. Like, really got kicked into gear was during COVID, when the schools were shut down and sports weren't happening. They would go in there and they would pass these bills that were, they would flag them as like emergency bills that need to go into effect immediately. And, the rest of the world wasn't really paying attention to what was happening. So they kind of were able to more or less push these things through. Democrats would vote against it, but in a lot of these states, that doesn't really matter because, in Kansas, for instance, there's a Democratic governor who vetoed the bill, but
Yeah.
that veto got, they overrode the veto. But like the only hope of pushback when you don't have the votes on your side is that there will be media coverage, that there will be, boycotts of the state or something like that, which is what you saw in 2016 when North Carolina dipped its toes into the anti-trans laws. Which, looking at that, like that law compared to like what's going on in states right now is so, I'm sure there are people who would look at that and go, that's pretty moderate. That's pretty. Oh, it was a bathroom ban in federal or in state-owned buildings. That's not a huge deal. That's why isn't that everywhere? But it was a huge thing to where there was backlash, and you had the NBA All-Star game was supposed to be in Charlotte and had to move because people were boycotting North Carolina and all of this. But like now the state implements these like laws, and everyone shrugs and just kind of goes, okay.
Yeah. Well, and I will say that, on the issue of trans rights, that I think the advocates for it didn't learn enough from the battle for same-sex marriage. Because that battle was won in the legal and political sectors after it was won in the cultural sectors. And that's, whereas with trans rights, I think a lot of people were like, okay, yeah, all right, we got the marriage rights now, marriage equality. Okay, now let's immediately go to trans rights through legislation and all this other stuff. And it's like, right, at this point, a lot of people didn't even know that trans people existed. Because you didn't see trans representation in media, and so.
And the thing
You
about
can't win. Sorry, so you can't win politically if you haven't made you have when you're making an argument for progressive change. There is an unfortunate, somatic discomfort with anything new and unfamiliar,
Mhm.
and that has to be overcome, and it
Mhm.
can only be overcome through personal interventions and cultural interventions first.
And that's the tricky thing. It is because after the marriage equality ruling in 2015, all of the conservative anti-marriage equality groups, like, they kind of regrouped and they were like, we need to pivot to something we can win, and we need to aim our firepower at that. And so they kind of shifted to, okay, we're going to go after trans people, because they're, like, there haven't actually been a lot of big, like, pushes for pro-trans laws. Like, a lot of the bills that get introduced in states, that are pro-trans, are like just sort of protecting against, like, things being taken away.
This anti-discrimination.
Yeah, like anti-discrimination laws, but, like, it was kind of basically, there were only two states in 2018. There were only two states in the entire country that where a trans person couldn't, under any circumstances, update their birth certificate, um, which is kind of crazy to think about right now. Like, we didn't advance from that to, like, okay, now every state can. It went from, like, okay, only two states block you from doing this. Like, other states had, the more conservative states would have, like, really strict requirements on, like, surgery and what kind of surgery you need to have before you can update your documents or something like that. But yeah, it went backwards fast. It was a lot of people realizing, like, learning for the first time what existing policy was, uh, and then being like, oh, I don't like that. Oh, wait, you mean they've been able to use the same bathroom as me for decades? Oh, I don't like that. We got to change that. It was a lot of that. And the suddenly trans people became hyper exposed in media. Uh, and it wasn't really something that trans people as a whole, and I can't speak for trans people as a whole, but most trans people I know weren't, like, super thrilled when Time magazine was like the transgender tipping point, and because you had a single trans woman on a Netflix streaming show, which, that was when people did not watch TV shows on Netflix. There were like there was House of Cards and there was Orange is the New Black and, like, one other one out there. These were not, like, huge things. And because you had one trans woman as a recurring character on a TV show, Time magazine was like, congrats, guys, you did it. And then you had Caitlyn Jenner coming out, probably made things so much worse because she's just a disaster of a human being. And and it made things really difficult because for like a year there, or year 2, 3, you had media outlets trying to raise up to be like, here's this group that people don't understand. You should learn more about them, and we'll amplify trans voices and stuff like that. But then Donald Trump takes office, and around 2017, 2018, all of that stuff kind of fades because the chaos of Trump 1 is happening, and you start to see more anti-trans focus in media, and not as much, like, positive representation out there. Because, I mean, growing up, the only trans representation there ever was like the Jerry Springer show, and the movie Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. So, where the villain is outed as a trans woman at the end, and then Ace Ventura, played by Jim Carrey, because he had like kissed her earlier in the movie, he has a scene where he vomits for like 3 minutes straight or something like that. It's like, that was kind of like growing up. That was my exposure to the idea of trans people. And I think that for a lot of people, that was kind of it. And then you had this tiny window where media was trying to give trans people more of a platform to create a Will and Grace type moment, which that people will always point back to Will and Grace being a show on NBC, improving the public's opinions of gay people. And it just didn't sustain. And then you had years and years of kind of attacks. And it's now to the point where, unfortunately, what happens is you can, because, if I went, okay, I am going to seek out a story of actually, Breitbart used to have a vertical on its website that was labeled Black Crime. And you click it, and it's just stories about Black people committing crimes. Like that was all it was. And the entire strategy there was to get you to feel a certain way about Black people and committing crimes, and to really shape that. And during the first Trump administration, they kind of did that, where they did like immigrant crime, where they would put out reports where they're like, here, you had some illegal immigrants committing acts of crime. Look at this, which, that strategy, it during World War II, the Nazis would do that, where they'd be like, look, here's Jews who committed crimes and stuff like that. And now that happens with trans people, and we're just this tiny little percentage of the population. And it's like, yeah, there are going to be trans people who commit crimes, and there are going to be trans people who are weird, and there are going to be trans people who are very off-putting. Sometimes I am one of them. But it's like, it's just so easy for right-wing outlets to find those examples, especially with the internet, especially with social media.
Well, yeah, you got a country with, close to 400 million people in it.
Yeah.
Of course, there are going to be some assholes and some criminals of whatever demographic. Like Ben Shapiro is really mad at Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson for being anti-Semitic, which they appear to be. And he keeps saying, well, that's unacceptable. We can't have this kind of bigotry and conservatism. And it's like, well, you opened the door to this, buddy.
Yeah.
You're the one that said it's great to have bigotry against immigrants or against trans people, or, whatever group, or Black people. Ben Shapiro has been very racist toward Black people as well. So like they don't care about how this might affect them down the road. They really don't. And so they will say whatever it takes to get them an advantage. And so that is ultimately why you do have to, if you're going to oppose these people in the generic sense as a party, you have to stand up for everybody, because otherwise you're going to lose. And to go back to the UK Labour point, so now the polling there, as we're recording today, I saw a poll that to your point, that showed the Reform Party as the number one party and the Green Party as number two. So Labour isn't even number two, anymore. So it's like they've eaten up their own coalition and offended people, because people are like, well, why am I voting for you?
Yeah.
If you're not standing up for the people, for the ideas. So like on the left, center left, people actually do vote for policies.
Yeah.
So you can't. This is a losing strategy, and all it does is make bigotry worse.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's one of those things that it's I just kind of have to hope, and being trans, I have to hope that the Democrats hold strong, because as there was an article that Erin Reed, who she writes a newsletter called Erin in the Morning. It's all about trans issues. She had something that was like, why trans people aren't feeling Gavin Newsom. Like why if you bring up the name Gavin Newsom, some trans people kind of recoil. And it's because, he'd have Charlie Kirk on his podcast and he'd talk about how, like, yeah, you've got some reasonable concerns and I understand that. And it's like Charlie Kirk has sense of he said some horrible things about trans people. But, it's the thing is, like, if you create a situation where you don't have one party, at least one of your two major parties, fighting for trans people's rights or opposing efforts to strip trans people's rights, and it just becomes the political consensus, that's very bad for trans people. Like, very, very bad. And, suddenly you have no one really fighting for you. Like, the Green Party in the UK is, is pro-trans, basically. But it's one of those things that's just like, you don't want to have a situation where there's a consensus. Yeah, we all agree trans people are bad. And Labor gave that up, gave up trans issues because they wanted to take it off the table. They didn't want to get attacked about it anymore. And it turns out most people don't cast their votes based on trans issues, pro or against. I mean,
yeah.
And that both works in trans people's favor and against trans people, because it makes it hard if you're being oppressed if no one actually cares whether or not that's happening, which is kind of the reality. But it's so it's like there's very little to gain from Democrats, like, shifting to the right on trans issues. But it's it would be disastrous for trans people as a whole, if that were to happen. And I think that's why trans people are really scared and kind of freaked out right now about, like, what's going to happen. Like, what direction is this party going in? Is this going to be a party that defends trans people? Because there are Democrats who are very good on trans rights. J.B. Pritzker here in Illinois, very good on trans rights. It's not that he's signing a whole bunch of pro-trans laws or talking about trans people all the time. He just, whenever it comes up, he's just like, he puts his foot down and he says he supports trans people. Like, that's cool. That's all anyone's really asking for.
Yeah.
And, I think that had Republicans not sunk $200 million or whatever into the Kamala's for they them ads in 2024, that this wouldn't be as much of an issue. But people saw those ads and they had a very they had a very specific reaction to them, and they were like, oh, I'm seeing these all the time. I bet this is making people feel weird, and I don't want my people to think that I'm weird, and so I'm gonna, it's gonna sit in the back of my mind. And I think that there are a lot of, like, Democrats and Democratic strategists who saw that, and they've inflated the weight that voters actually put on the trans issues.
I think this tendency, this belief that voters are obsessed with hating trans people, it really started after Glenn Youngkin won the Virginia governor's race during Joe Biden's presidency and off-year election of 2022. And the thing is, like, this was another of those thermostatic elections. So the Virginia governor race pretty much almost always goes to the person who is the party opposite of the president. That's pretty much how it always goes. And to the extent it doesn't, it goes toward Democrats in the past few decades. And so Glenn Youngkin won a squeaker of an election, and he did talk about trans stuff a lot, and anti-COVID safety precautions and whatnot. Like, but people were like, oh, it was the trans issues that got him the election, and this is why he won. Well, and then fast forward to 4 years later, in 2025, well, the Republican who was running in that race, she talked pretty much only about hating trans people in her election, and she got her ass kicked by Abigail Spanberger. So I think, it is astonishing to me that everybody who was like, oh, voters hate trans people, they didn't turn around and say, oh, well, voters must love trans
Yeah.
people because Abigail Spanberger won the election. And it's like, well, you can't have it both ways here, guys. Like the reality is, it's just not a big issue for anybody on either side of the aisle. And so you should deal with that and just do what you want. If you are a Democrat and you support trans rights, just fucking do it, and it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, which I whenever I see polling about like how people view Democrats, it's not so much they're too liberal, they're too they're too progressive, whatever. It's they're weak. They don't believe in anything, and I think like that's the worst thing to be seen as a politician, as to not stand for anything, to if you're running as a Democrat. I think that again, when you're running on a kind of fascist agenda, like Trump, he doesn't really believe anything. But he sells it in this strongman kind of way, that in a way that Democrats just can't. Like you can't be like, I don't know what I believe, but I would like to raise taxes on, some top tier of earners. It's like something like that. It just doesn't work that way. You've got to stand for something, and that's what I to kind of to circle it back to the talk about the war, to come full circle on that. It's like now is the chance to take a stand that has public support, and to like put your feet in the ground to say, I don't think we should, I don't think we should be at war with Iran, or I don't think we should continue to do whatever. Like just to say something firmly, as opposed to doing the whole like, well, like, yeah, I can agree that Iran is bad, but Trump didn't ask us permission before he invaded, stuff like that. I think that especially Democrats who want to run for president in the future, like they have to remember how much the Iraq war like weighed on, in the 2020 or 2008 primary with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. She voted to invade Iraq, and he wasn't in a position where he had to vote on that at that point. So that worked out in his favor, and he spoke against the war. And there were a lot of, I think, especially younger voters who resonated with that. And it's more that it's like, yeah, you stood for something. You believed something. You took a position. You're gonna shut down Guantanamo Bay, which didn't happen. But I think that there's this real fear among Democratic politicians, especially, to stand for anything, to really truly stand for anything. Because if you ask me what Kamala Harris believes, I don't know. It's changed over the years, and she won't give clear answers sometimes, and sometimes when she does, it's just kind of talking herself in a circle. And I don't think that resonates with people. I don't think that resonates with voters who are plugged in. And it's not so much, I do think that there's a risk of just having people who do pay attention to politics and do care about these things, just starting to tune out if it feels like no one's fighting for them. Like people got really excited for Zoran Mamdani, and because he had concrete like ideas that he stood for, that he wanted to implement as mayor of New York, and now he's doing that. And people seem to have strong opinions one way or another about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because she takes stands and she believes in things. I don't think that anyone's like, oh, like Seth Moulton, he's he's the guy I want to like, like I want to get behind. Like he's the one I can believe in, or Dean Phillips, or any of these like kind of like weird centristy, kinds of Democrats, where it's just like you just want to be in power. You don't really care what you're asked to do after that, basically.
Yeah. Or John Fetterman. But,
Yeah.
but on the other side, you look at it isn't even necessarily about ideology either. Like that is something that I do think people on in the different sides of the Democratic Party also have to realize. So, like people in New York have really come to like Mamdani, but they also like Abigail Spanberger. And the thing that both of them have in common in their states is that they do stand for things and they fight hard for them, and that's what people want. And in terms of your specific, economic policies or whatever, people will take those or leave those, but they want to know that you're on their side and they want to see you fighting for them, however you define what that is. And we could even say that Trump himself has done that. Like that is why at least some of his people, or maybe most of them, like that's why they support him, because they see him as fighting for them. And
Yeah.
And so you got to do that. And so maybe let's just go to the last topic here,
Okay.
which is that so as much as bad things have gotten for trans people, there have been a couple of recent controversies, and one of them involving yourself on Blue Sky, but also more recently involving the New York Times columnist Jamelle Bouie.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people saying that Jamelle Bouie is transphobe, or that you yourself are not sufficiently supportive of trans people. And this is exactly what the Christo-fascists want people to be doing. Like, and I don't think that people get that. Like, their politics, if you are a progressive person, it has to be more than just, therapy. Like, activism, criticizing people on the internet is not activism.
No.
You actually have to be doing something, and tearing apart people on your own side who are not 100% agreeing with you. Look, and even if they did something that you thought was wrong, that doesn't mean that they have to be banished or whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't know, it's tough. But I haven't experienced it like you have. Or you want to just say it from your side then, or
yeah. So basically, it was like 5 minutes before we started recording this that I noticed a bunch of notifications on Blue Sky that were like people who were like, "I'm so disappointed in you," and I'm like, "Oh God, what?" Yeah, I guess a few days ago, there was a trans woman who got in, like, disagreed with Jamelle over something, and then posted something like to the effect of like, trans woman breathes, Jamelle Bouie, shut up, or something like that. Like, that was the post, and it was like obviously exaggerated for effect. And he posted that, and he wrote, "What is going on with this site?" And Blue Sky can be a lot sometimes. And I just wrote, "Very weird," and didn't look into it anymore, because I was like, Jamelle is like, he's written pro-trans articles for the New York Times, which the New York Times
for years.
Yeah, for years. This is, he's like, he's gone on podcasts hosted by, Caitlin Burns, who's a trans woman. He went on her podcast recently, and he's a thoughtful guy, and I think he's really insightful. He's a much better writer than I am. Extrememly smart, and I assumed that this was people, because every once in a while there will be people who will kind of take this position of being like, yeah, the New York Times is evil, and anyone who works for the New York Times is also evil. And the same thing people will say about The Atlantic or The Economist or any of these other legacy media type places. And I don't think it's an incorrect view to have. It's a view that I think people are perfectly welcome to hold. That they're not going to support someone who works for an institution they see as harmful to them, which I totally understand that. And I kind of just assumed it was about that specifically. But yeah, I wrote very weird, and then I got people who were like, "You called a trans woman weird," and you took his side in this argument, and I need to like look into like what their back and forth was. But Blue Sky makes it really difficult sometimes, because when one person blocks another, it becomes like almost impossible on the actual Blue Sky app to look up like what was said.
Well, literally, yeah, it shows
it just
the
it's
post blocked.
yes, which you know what? I think that's probably one of the best features of Blue Sky, that it's just like you block and it's nuclear. It's just gone. But yeah, so I think we're at this kind of point where there's a lot of frustration among trans people in particular, because we're not heard. We're not often given platforms in these elite publications to the last time the New York Times published anything by me was 2018. And and that was rare. And having that platform even at that time, that puts me at a really different level than someone whose only ability to get their voice out and to express themselves is to post on Blue Sky or Twitter or wherever, and to maybe be frustrated with how things are going. And it's just one of those things that I hope that we can all kind of talk to each other a bit more, especially when it's people who fundamentally do agree on things like, should trans people have rights? Should trans people be attacked nonstop? Because trans people need allies in this the way forward, because trans people often aren't going to get a lot of space in the New York Times or the Atlantic. The Atlantic today, as trans people are having, in Kansas, we talked about that, what's happening there. The Atlantic ran a piece that was like, are we sure that gay men aren't being told that they're trans and being forced to transition or something like that? It was in defense of effeminate gay boys or something like that. And it's really frustrating, because they'll give space to those sorts of stories all the time.
Which, by the way, that is the opinion of the Iranian mullahs.
Yes.
That's literally what they do to anyone who is gay.
Yeah. Yeah, which is, and so it's one of those things where it's like, it sucks that all of these institutions are constantly doing that, or they're running, the New York Times running 10 different pieces about like, are trans kids getting healthcare too easily? It's actually very difficult to get any sort of trans healthcare. Like the idea that oh, kids are being tricked into this, and their parents don't know what's going on, and all this stuff. It's just not very accurate. And the fact that the New York Times will run article after article after article on this, when none of the science has changed really on this stuff in ever, in like a decade or two, but the politics have changed, and all these stories aren't about like changes in science. They're just changes in like, well, which way is the political wind blowing? And I don't think these outlets care that by running all these stories, what they're doing, if you run a bunch of stories that are like, is there something wrong with trans kids? Are trans people getting healthcare too easily? You're going to start to think, maybe trans people are getting healthcare too easily. Like all of that stuff, it's going to build up, and it's going to shift public opinion, as it has. Someone was trying to look up like when the last time a trans person wrote a pro-trans piece in The Atlantic, and like the most recent piece someone could find was from 2018, which that's a long time. Meanwhile, they have they have columnists who regularly post anti-trans stuff. They multiple pieces that just in 2026, and so I understand the frustration, and I don't know how to fix that. How to fix the fact that people are angry and they're upset, and for good reason. It sucks feeling like you don't have a voice, and it sucks, even if you have a voice, have something of a platform, that you'll feel like you're not doing enough with it, or doing the right thing with it, or wielding it in the best way possible. And so it's a real challenge. So yeah. Now that
and it's a challenge on both sides also, because in defense of the trans woman that was kind of initiated or became the focal point of this little mini scandal, she has a small account and doesn't have a lot of followers, and he quote tweeted her saying something that was critical of him, and and I think that's just bad form. Like if you're if you've got a zillion followers on social media, you shouldn't be quote tweeting somebody who's on your own side by and large. And even if you think they were a jerk, you can tell them in a reply that they're a jerk. You don't need to sick your entire followers on them and be like, hey, look at this asshole. And so she didn't like that, and a lot of trans people didn't like what happened to her. So it's not a thing where I think everybody was perfect or one side was perfect. We have to this goes back to the paradox that the right wing, the fascists, the reactionaries, they embrace being evil. So the only way you can effectively oppose them is to be good and to be charitable and to be nice to the people on your own side. And I know that sucks sometimes because sometimes people are rude and nasty or obtuse or whatever you don't like about them. Yes, it's true. But we can't, we have to be respectful of our own side. Everybody does.
Cool. That's good place to end it.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. Well, this is good. And I'm glad we got to hit on all the points.
Absolutely. It's great talking to you. But yeah, I have to now go get my dog's food because they are hungry.
All right. So that is the program for today. I appreciate you joining us for the conversation. And you can always get more if you go to theoryofchange.show, where we have the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And if you are a paid subscribing member, you have unlimited access to the archives. And I thank you very much for your support. It's much appreciated. I'll see you next time.